Hi, I'm Emily. I'll be your storyteller today. Many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Also, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable. Close your eyes and let the sound of the rain guide you into the story. The rain began as I carried the last box inside. It wasn't heavy, but the air was dense with the scent of wet leaves, damp earth, and the lingering cold that settles into your skin when the sky closes in. I set the box down by the window and looked out across the overgrown yard. The trees bowed gently under the weight of the water, and beyond them, the fog erased the line between ground and sky. The house was quiet. Too quiet. It was an old structure, tucked at the edge of a forgotten road, 5 miles from the nearest town and further still from anything resembling noise. I had chosen it for the silence. After everything, I thought silence would be a kindness. But this silence felt loaded, the kind that listens. I unpacked slowly, letting the echo of drawers opening and paper rustling fill the space. The creak of the floorboards beneath me felt louder than it should have. By nightfall, the storm had deepened. The wind carried the scent of wet wood through the cracked frames of the windows, and the old pipes groaned like someone exhaling behind the walls. I lit candles in the living room and settled onto the couch with a blanket, expecting the calm exhaustion that comes after a long day. But instead of sleepiness, I felt restless. My ears strained toward the walls, though I told myself it was just the house adjusting to the cold. Then came the sound, faint at first, a tapping. Not rhythmic, not mechanical, more like fingers brushing softly, slowly, against plaster. It started behind the bookshelf, paused, then returned nearer to the light switch. I held my breath. The heater clicked on, masking the sound for a moment, but when it clicked off again, the tapping resumed. I stood still, the candle flickering, in my hand, and whispered to the dark, "Is someone there?" But the house said nothing. I pressed my ear to the wall, feeling ridiculous. There was only the thrum of the rain and the occasional moan of timber. But just as I turned away, I heard it again. A small sound, wet and deliberate, like a fingertip dragging slowly along the inside of the wall. My stomach tightened. I stepped back, staring at the spot. I told myself it was nothing, just water, just the old bones of a tired house. But as I climbed the stairs, I couldn't help but notice. The sound never came from the same place twice. Upstairs, the bedroom was colder than I remembered it being earlier. I hadn't turned the heat on in that part of the house yet, so I layered on a sweater and pulled the blankets tighter around me. The rain tapped gently against the roof, steady and calming. For a moment, I almost believed it would lull me to sleep. But just as my eyes began to close, I heard the sound again. Not loud, not demanding, just present. This time it came from the wall behind the headboard. A single knock, then silence. I sat up, pulse quickening. My phone was on the high nightstand, the screen dim and unread. I thought about recording the sound, just to prove to myself I wasn't imagining it. But when I opened the recording app and pressed start, the tapping stopped. I waited in the dark, phone in hand, trying to steady my breath. The silence stretched longer than it should have. I left the bed and walked barefoot across the cold floor to the wall. I placed my palm against the wallpaper, which was peeling slightly near the baseboard. The wall was cool, but not cold. Solid, but somehow not still. I leaned in closer and closed my eyes. And there it was again. Not tapping now, just the faintest creak, like something shifting just out of sight. A breath held behind wood and paint. I pulled away, heartbeat loud in my ears. I told myself again that it was old pipes, maybe a squirrel in the attic. Something simple, something explainable. But deep down, I knew the difference. I'd lived in old houses before. I'd heard creaks and groans and drafts. This wasn't that. This had intention. It moved when I moved. It paused when I paused. It listened. I went back to bed, pulled the covers over my head like a child, and forced myself to count backward from 100. By the time I reached 63, I couldn't hear the rain anymore. Just the soft, irregular tap of something behind the wall, matching the rhythm of my breath. I woke sometime in the early hours to silence. The kind of silence that feels stretched too thin, as if the world had been muted just before something important. The candle on the dresser had gone out. My phone's screen was black, unresponsive. I sat up slowly, the cold air tightening around my shoulders like wet cloth. The rain had stopped, but the smell lingered, earthy, metallic, like wet iron. I listened. Nothing. No creaks, no taps. I almost felt foolish for being afraid the night before. But when I swung my legs out of bed and my feet touched the floor, something changed. The boards beneath the window gave a soft groan, too soft, like a foot pressing down and pulling away. I froze, eyes locked on the darkness just beyond the curtain. I whispered again, "Hello." Not expecting an answer, not wanting one. A faint thump came in response. From the hallway, not loud, not sharp, just misplaced, like something had fallen gently onto carpet. I stepped toward the door and opened it slowly, the hinges squealing just enough to unsettle me. The hall was dark, lit only by the moonlight filtering through the stained glass window at the end. I saw nothing, but I felt something. A change, in pressure, like someone had just passed me in silence. I checked every room. Bathroom, guest room, the little alcove with the antique chair. Nothing out of place. No doors open. No windows cracked. But when I returned to my bedroom, something had shifted. The blanket on the bed was wrinkled differently. The pillow slightly dented on the side I hadn't touched. I stood in the doorway for a long time, not daring to step inside. Quiet had weight now. Eventually, I crawled back under the covers and stared at the ceiling until dawn. The rain didn't return, but I couldn't forget the sound, the softness of it, the intention. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the house hadn't settled in around me. Something inside it had noticed I was here. The morning light made everything look harmless again. The hallway that had breathed with presence just hours before was now bathed in soft gold. The pillow on the bed seemed ordinary. The creak in the floor, ignorable. I made tea in the quiet kitchen, trying to laugh at myself, though it came out thin and unconvincing. I opened the windows and let the fresh air in, hoping it would chase away whatever clung to the walls during the night. Outside, the ground was soaked, and the sky had that post-rain stillness I usually loved. I walked through the yard, checking the foundation and peeking beneath the porch. Nothing. No loose boards, no nests, no reason for the sounds. But when I passed the east-facing wall, I noticed something odd. A faint line, vertical, thin, like a seam running just beneath the paint. I ran my fingers over it, but it was smooth, invisible to the eye unless the light hit just right. Back inside, I began organizing the office. Books on shelves, curtains, drawn, desk by the window. I turned on a small radio I found in one of the boxes, letting soft static fill the room. The sound comforted me, at least at first. But as I filed away a stack of old papers, I noticed the static shifting. It wasn't constant anymore. There were gaps, clicks, pauses, as if something were breathing between the waves. I turned the volume down and listened. A voice, maybe? A whisper? But when I leaned closer, the radio went dead. That night, the rain didn't come. But as I lay in bed, I missed it. Not for the peace it once gave, but because silence now felt louder. The absence of sound left too much space for everything else. I kept the lamp on, a book open in my lap, though I didn't read a word. My ears stayed focused on the walls, waiting, hoping they would stay still, but also wondering what I might hear if they didn't. Just before sleep took me, I thought I heard it again. Not the tapping, not the dragging. This time it was a hum, low, nearly melodic, like someone singing through teeth. It lasted only a few seconds, but when I opened my eyes and looked toward the corner of the room, I could have sworn the wallpaper moved, only slightly, like it was breathing. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the hum. It hadn't been loud, but it had settled in my spine like a cold thread, tugging at something older than fear. I got out of bed before the sun fully rose and wandered the house barefoot, listening. I tapped on the walls, lightly at first, then more deliberately. Most answered with the dull thud of old wood and insulation, but not the living room wall. That one sounded hollow. I tapped again, this time in a slow, steady rhythm. The echo that returned wasn't quite right. It carried a delay, as if the space behind the wall wasn't empty but waiting. I leaned in, pressing my ear to the plaster, and caught the faintest sound. Not a creak, not a knock, something softer. A scrape, like nails dragged slowly along stone. I pulled back fast, my breath clouding in the cool air. The house was warmer than yesterday, but that wall felt cold. I called a local handyman listed in a dusty flyer I'd found tucked in one of the kitchen drawers. His name was Cole, and he arrived an hour later in a dented truck with foggy headlights. He was polite, but distant, like someone forced into conversation they'd rather avoid. I showed him the wall. He knocked, pressed, ran a small device along the surface. "Nothing wrong here," he said. "Probably air pockets, old insulation." But he wouldn't meet my eyes when he said it. When I asked if he'd worked on the house before, his expression flickered. "No one has," he muttered. "Not in a long time." I tried to press further, but he changed the subject, asking about the weather, the trees, anything but the wall. Before leaving, he paused at the door and glanced over his shoulder. "If you hear anything," he said, "don't answer it." Then he left, tires spitting gravel as he sped off down the road. His words lingered long after the sound of the truck faded. Don't answer it, as if the house were asking questions. I walked back to the living room and stood before the wall. I whispered, What do you want?" Half joking, half not. No response, just silence. But as I turned to leave, a soft knock came from behind the plaster. 3 slow taps, evenly spaced. Not threatening, not urgent, just present. I didn't respond. I stood there, spine rigid, breath shallow, waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't. The knock had been final, like punctuation at the end of a sentence I hadn't spoken. I pressed my hand to the wall once more. Still cold, still hollow. But something inside it felt aware. I stepped back, heart thudding in my ears, and left the room without turning off the light. That night, the rain returned. Soft at first, then heavier, like fingers drumming slowly on the roof. I sat by the window listening. It should have been soothing, but every sound now felt like a message I couldn't decipher. I turned on the radio again, hoping for static, for normalcy. But the moment it buzzed to life, it caught a frequency. A voice, faint and distant, repeating a single word I couldn't make out. Then silence. Then just rain. I moved to the living room couch with a blanket and a mug of tea that quickly went cold. The hum hadn't returned, but the sense of being watched had. It wasn't a malicious presence, not exactly. Just curious. I whispered into the empty room, "What are you?" Not expecting a reply. A moment passed. Then, from somewhere inside the wall, one slow knock. Not from the same spot as earlier. This time it came from higher up, closer to the ceiling. I stared at the drywall, the pale yellow paint, the slight warping near the top corner. I'd walked past it a dozen times without noticing anything, but now it pulsed with attention. I dragged over a chair and climbed up, inspecting the area. Nothing obvious. No vents, no damage. Just a faint scent, like wet stone and old paper. I leaned in, ear pressed to the plaster. Silence. Then, so soft I could have imagined it, a breath. Long, slow, from the other side, I fell back, heart racing. The chair tipped, and I caught myself just in time. My mug shattered on the floor. The sound echoed through the room, and somewhere behind the wall, I heard movement, like something adjusting, retreating. I stood in the middle of the mess, breathing, hard, and for the first time, I felt something deeper than fear. Not panic, not dread, recognition. As if I had heard that breath once before. Maybe not in this house, maybe not in this life, but somewhere. I cleaned up the shards of porcelain and tried to return to my routine, but everything felt shifted. Even the light filtering through the curtains seemed off, warmer, but not comforting, like the sun itself was watching. I opened the windows to let in fresh air, hoping to dispel whatever tension had settled in the walls. The breeze smelled of pine and damp soil, but beneath it, faint and fleeting, was that same scent from the top corner, wet stone and forgotten paper. I spent the afternoon researching old houses with hollow walls. I read about insulation gaps, structural cavities, even small service tunnels from decades past. But none of it explained the sounds. None of it explained the breath. I searched property records, trying to find blueprints or old maps. The house had changed owners many times, but the trail grew cold before the 1970s. There was no mention of renovations, no record of what the walls might hide. I returned to the living room before sunset, and tapped the wall again, this time using a wooden spoon. It gave a different tone, duller, like something soft had filled the space. I leaned closer and whispered, "Are you there?" Silence. Then, faintly, from inside the plaster, a reply. Not a word. A scratch, deliberate, measured, like someone tracing a pattern just beneath the surface. I stepped back and stared. I remembered what Cole had said. Don't answer it. But hadn't I already? I lit a candle, placing it near the base of the wall, and watched the flame. At first it burned steady. Then it bent slightly, not from a draft, but from something unseen pressing gently outward. I reached for the wall again. My fingertips tingled, and for a heartbeat, I thought I felt another hand pressing back, smaller than mine, colder. I jerked away, knocking over the candle. The flame sputtered out on the rug. I sat in the quiet, heart thudding, too afraid to move, too afraid not to. That night, I didn't sleep in the bedroom. I curled up on the couch with the lights on and a blanket over my head, like I had when I was 5 and thought monsters hid in my closet. Only now, the monster didn't hide. It knocked. And I wasn't sure if it wanted to come out or let me. And when I woke the next morning, the room was bright with sunlight and too quiet. Not peaceful, emptied. The kind of silence that follows a question no one wants to answer. The wall looked the same. No cracks, no stains, no marks. But I knew something had changed. Not outside the wall, within it. As if my presence had confirmed something for whatever lived or waited there. I avoided that room for most of the day. I busied myself in the kitchen, organizing drawers, cleaning cabinets, pretending I still had control. But no matter where I stood, I felt the pressure of that silence reaching for me. When I finally entered the living room again, the air felt different, heavier. I crossed the floor slowly and placed my hand once more on the wall. This time there was no cold, just stillness, like it was listening now, waiting for me to speak, and I nearly did. I nearly whispered a name I didn't remember knowing. The letters felt formed in my mouth already, soft, round, familiar. But before the sound passed my lips, something behind the wall moved. Not a knock, not a breath. Just a shift in weight, as if something had leaned close, eager to hear. I stepped back, trembling. I hadn't spoken, but whatever it was had heard the thought. That night, I didn't light candles. I didn't turn on the radio. I left the house dark and let the rain come. It tapped gently at the windows, and for a while, I let myself believe it was normal. Just weather, just a storm. But then came the echo. 3 soft knocks, spaced wide apart. Not from the living room, from the hallway, from the other side of the bedroom wall. I rose without thinking and walked slowly toward the sound. Each footstep matched by a whisper in the back of my mind. Not words, not commands, just suggestion. As if the house were no longer waiting for me to listen, but ready for me to remember. And as I reached for the doorknob, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I was curious. The rain cleared by morning, leaving the world slick and soft, as if the sky had rinsed the earth clean. I needed to get out of the house. The air inside felt stale, like too many breaths had been taken without exhale. I pulled on my coat and walked into the village, boots crunching over gravel and wet leaves. The streets were mostly empty, except for a few faces behind windows, and one woman standing outside the post office, tying a scarf beneath her chin. She watched me approach without smiling, but her eyes were kind, tired but curious. I nodded politely and said hello. Her voice when she replied was rough like wind through pine needles. "You're in the Hollis place, aren't you?" I hesitated, surprised she knew. I nodded. "Strange time to move in," she said. "That house breathes better in the rain." Her phrasing was odd, but not unfriendly, like someone speaking of a person they'd known long ago and still remembered fondly. I asked her what she meant, but she just looked past me toward the trees. Some houses hold on to things, sounds, shadows, secrets. They wait for ears that listen. She didn't elaborate. I asked her name. "You can call me Nora," she said, "but names aren't as fixed as people think." She turned to leave, her scarf flapping in the wind like a flag surrendering to a quiet war. I watched her until she disappeared down a narrow path I hadn't noticed before. Back home, her words stayed with me. The house breathes better in the rain. I found myself walking through the rooms differently now, ears open not for danger but for rhythm, breath. And it was there, beneath the floorboards, behind the drywall, not constant, not loud, just consistent, like a sleeper in the next room. I placed my hand on the living room wall again. This time, it was warm. I rearranged the bookshelves that afternoon, half from boredom, half from instinct. Something about the far left side had always felt off, too close to the edge of the wall, too flush. And that's when I saw it. A seam. A faint line where the wallpaper didn't match perfectly. I ran my fingers along it, heart thudding, and pressed gently. Nothing moved. But I heard it. A whisper, not from behind the wall, but from inside the room. A single word I couldn't understand, spoken in a child's voice. I froze. The word had no meaning I could grasp, but it felt familiar. Not in language, but in weight. Like something I had once known in a dream and forgotten on purpose. I whispered, "Hello?" into the empty room, and for a long moment there was nothing. Then came the sound again. Not a voice, but movement. A gentle shift behind the bookshelf. Not frantic, not afraid, just present. I pulled the remaining books aside and examined the seam more closely. It wasn't just wallpaper. It was a thin, wooden panel painted to match. The edge had been nailed in place, but poorly, as if someone had covered it in a hurry. I fetched a screwdriver from the kitchen drawer and began working at the seam. As I pried it loose, the air behind the panel changed. It rushed out like a sigh, carrying with it the smell of old dust, mildew, and something sweeter, something like lavender. Behind the panel was darkness, a narrow vertical space no wider than my shoulders and about 6 feet tall. The walls inside were lined with what looked like faded fabric, almost like padding. Near the bottom, I saw something, metal glinting faintly in the afternoon light. I reached in, arm trembling, and pulled out a single rusted hairpin. It was delicate, old, and still curled with a strand of hair. long and pale. I dropped it instinctively, heart pounding, and stumbled back. The panel hung open behind me like a mouth mid-breath. I didn't close it. I couldn't bring myself to seal it again. Instead, I backed out of the room and locked myself in the bathroom, running water just to drown the silence. My reflection in the mirror looked older, paler, like I had taken something from the wall and left a piece of myself behind in return. That night, the rain returned, soft but insistent. I sat by the bookshelf, watching the panel, listening. There were no knocks, no breath. But sometime near midnight, I heard something slide against the inside of the wall. A whisper of movement, like someone had turned over in bed just a few feet away. And in the silence that followed, I realized I hadn't heard the hum again, but I had begun to hum it myself. The next day, I tried to pretend I'd imagined it all. The panel, the hairpin, the whisper. I shut the bookshelf tight and draped a blanket over it, like a child hiding from shadows. I cleaned the kitchen twice, organized the hallway closet, and walked to the market in town just to feel the cold wind on my face. The shopkeeper asked how I was settling in. I told him everything was quiet. He nodded too quickly, eyes flicking, away before I'd finished. As I left the store, I saw her again. Nora. The scarf was different this time, dark green with gold stitching. She stood near the edge of the square, watching the sky as if reading it. I approached and asked if she'd ever been inside my house. Her reply was slow. Not for many years, but I remember the sound of it. I asked what she meant. She smiled, faintly, and said, "Some houses speak. Yours sings." That night I searched for the song. I sat in silence with my eyes closed, listening not for voices, but for melody. And eventually I heard it, soft, like a lullaby played underwater. It didn't come from the walls this time. It came from the spaces between thoughts, from the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock. It wove itself into everything, a thread of memory I couldn't quite hold on to. I woke the next morning unsure how I'd fallen asleep. The blanket was folded neatly on the armchair, though I hadn't touched it. The bookshelf panel was closed. I rushed over and pulled it open. The space inside was empty. No hairpin, no fabric, no scent. Just a smooth, narrow void where something had once waited. I stared into it until my eyes ached, trying to remember what I'd taken from it, or what it had taken from me. Then I noticed the bookshelf itself. A book I didn't recognize sat on the middle shelf, bound in navy cloth, no title on the spine. I opened it. The pages were blank, except for one, near the center. In shaky handwriting it read, "She hummed to remember. She whispered to stay." My name was written beneath it. I didn't remember writing it, but the ink was still fresh. I closed the book and set it gently on the table, as if it might dissolve under too much pressure. My name, written in someone else's hand, stirred something deep in my chest. A memory just out of reach. I tried to tell myself I'd written it in my sleep, that I was exhausted, imagining things, but the ink hadn't smudged beneath my fingers. Someone or something wanted me to see it, wanted me to remember. That afternoon, I returned to the path where I'd last seen Nora. It twisted behind the post office and disappeared into trees thick with moss and shadow. I followed it slowly, the air growing cooler with every step. Eventually, It opened to a small, forgotten cemetery. Most of the stones were too worn to read, but one near the back caught my eye. Smooth, pale, and cracked at the base. A scarf had been tied around it, the same green one with gold stitching. There was no name on the stone, just a spiral, carved faintly near the top. I reached out to touch it, but before my fingers met the surface, I heard a voice behind me. She was the first to listen. I turned sharply. No one was there. Only wind. Only trees. But the words echoed, as if spoken directly into my ear. I looked down at the scarf again, and this time, I saw something tucked beneath the knot. A key. Small, blackened with age, shaped like a question mark. I didn't take it. Not yet. I walked home with the weight of it still pressing against my thoughts. The house welcomed me with silence, not cold this time, but warm, like it had been expecting me. I passed the bookshelf without looking. I sat at the desk and opened the blank book again. The ink had dried, but my name remained. Below it, a new line had appeared. She was the echo before the voice. That night, the rain returned once more, soft, patient. I didn't fear it now. I lay in bed and let it sing around the house, curling into corners and whispering between the walls. I still didn't understand the message, but I knew this much. The house had remembered me first, and now it was waiting for me to remember it. The rain hadn't stopped by morning. It came in steady sheets against the windows, and the wind rattled the trees like someone shaking secrets loose from their branches. I stood in the kitchen with the faucet running, not out of need, but to drown the feeling that something was listening. The silence between drops on the counter, between drips from the ceiling, felt charged, like a breath being held just behind the wall. I sat at the table with the key from the cemetery in front of me. I hadn't told anyone about it. I wasn't even sure I was meant to take it, yet it was there on my kitchen table, still shaped like a question mark, still whispering suggestions I didn't quite understand. I held it in my hand, and it felt warmer than it should, as though it had been inside a pocket. But I hadn't touched it since yesterday. Or had I? Later that afternoon, I turned off the lights and walked through the house slowly, letting only the gray light from the rain guide me. The walls creaked as they always did, but now I noticed patterns. Knocks that responded to footsteps, shifts in pressure when I paused. There was something inside the walls, not just moving, but following. It moved when I moved. It stopped when I spoke. In the living room, I stood before the shelf and stared at the panel. The book with my name still sat on the desk nearby, silent now. I stepped close and placed my ear against the wooden backing. At first there was nothing, but then came a sound I hadn't heard before. Not knocking, not scratching. It was a voice. Low, distant, and speaking words I couldn't understand. Not a language. Not exactly. It was more like breath shaped into meaning. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over the chair. The voice stopped immediately. My heart pounded in my throat, and I whispered, "Who are you?" to the empty room. No reply. But then something else happened. From behind the far wall, in the direction of the hallway, came 3 quick knocks. Not soft this time, not hesitant, They were firm, deliberate, and they were followed by something worse. My name, spoken in a voice I almost recognized. My own. I stood frozen in place, the sound of my own name hanging in the air like a thread stretched too tight. I whispered, "What do you want?" But my voice came out thin, uncertain. From behind the wall, nothing answered. At least not in words. Instead, the knock came again. 3 beats, then silence. Then, again, my name. Softer this time, as if testing how much of me it could wear without being noticed. I backed into the hallway, trying to keep my eyes on every corner at once. The silence that followed was thick, like walking underwater. I opened the front door for air, for escape, but the rain was coming down too hard to see anything beyond the porch. The trees blurred into dark shapes, and the wind howled like it was trying to speak without a mouth. I stepped back inside and locked the door, as if a lock would matter. The walls had changed. I couldn't explain how, but I felt it. They no longer seemed like boundaries. They felt porous, like skin too thin to hold back breath. I paced through the house, turning on every light, speaking aloud just to fill the space. This is my house. I live here. You are not welcome. I wasn't sure who I was talking to, but it made me feel less like prey, at least for a moment. I found myself back at the bookshelf, without realizing I'd walked there. The panel stood slightly ajar, though I hadn't touched it. The space behind it seemed deeper now, as if the wall had pulled inward, stretching, to make room for something. I knelt and looked inside. No sound, no movement. But as I leaned in, I noticed something different. A piece of torn fabric, wedged in the back corner. Small, faded pink. A child's dress. I didn't reach for it. I simply stared, heart thudding, breath shallow. Then came the hum again, low and slow, like it had crawled through the wood grain to find me. Only this time, it wasn't coming from behind the wall. It was coming from the hallway mirror. I turned slowly, and there I was, my reflection. Same face, same clothes, but it wasn't humming. Its mouth wasn't moving at all. I stepped closer to the mirror, heart pounding in my throat. My reflection stared back, identical, still. But something was wrong. The eyes. They were too wide, too bright, as if whatever looked through them was seeing the world for the first time. And though its lips didn't move, the hum grew louder. The sound vibrated in my ribs, deep and slow, like it came from inside me, not outside. I raised my hand, and so did it. Perfectly timed. But the longer I held the gesture, the more I noticed a delay. Tiny at first, then widening. My fingers moved before the reflections did. I dropped my arm, and it held the pose a second longer. That was enough. I backed away, whispering, "No, no, no," under my breath. Behind me, something creaked in the wall, the same soft shift of weight I'd heard 2 nights ago. I turned to the bookshelf, the panel still open, the torn pink fabric visible in the shadows. I reached for it before I could think better of it. The cloth was soft, old, damp, with something I hoped was only rainwater. Embroidered near the hem was a name, faded but legible. Lena. I said it aloud without meaning to. And the second I did, the hum stopped. Silence snapped around me like a closing fist. Then a sound, softer than a breath, sharper than a whisper. A giggle. From inside the wall. High, light, unmistakably young. I dropped the fabric and stumbled backward. The mirror still held my image, but now it was humming again. This time in a lower tone. A harmony. Two sounds where there should only be one. I covered the glass with a towel and turned every light in the house back on. That night, I sat awake in the living room, the panel now nailed shut again with trembling hands. The name Lena circled in my mind like a moth to flame. I tried to remember if I'd ever heard it before, but it felt new and ancient all at once. As the rain returned, I whispered the name once more. The walls didn't respond. But somewhere, inside the ceiling above me, I heard small footsteps. Bare, careful, like someone learning the house by heart. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her name stitched in pink thread, heard that small laugh echoing through wood and rain. I sat near the wall, a blanket around my shoulders, candle flickering beside me. The house didn't move. The mirror stayed covered. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Lena was awake, listening, maybe watching, waiting for something only I could give. Sometime near dawn, the lights flickered. Just once. Then again. I looked around the room, heart racing, and the power died completely. Darkness flooded in. Not just absence of light, but a thicker kind, like something pulled from beneath the floor. I lit the candle again and turned slowly toward the hallway. That's when I heard it. A voice. Not a laugh, not a whisper. A word. Drawn out. Wet. Whispered through teeth. Stay. I froze. The voice wasn't Lena's. It was deeper, hungrier, and it came from behind her name, from somewhere deeper in the wall. I backed away, candle trembling in my grip, and stepped on the corner of the pink fabric. It stuck to my foot like something alive. I shook it loose and watched it fall, flat at first, then fold itself, as if something beneath it had exhaled. Didn't speak. I didn't ask questions. I ran. Out the door, into the rain, barefoot on wet gravel. The wind lashed at my face, and I didn't care. I ran until the house disappeared behind trees, until I could no longer hear the breath of it following me. But even out there, among the fog and thunder, I felt the weight of it in my spine. The house hadn't been angry. It had been patient. And now, it had said something out loud for the first time. Later that day, after the power returned and the sky cleared, I walked back inside. Everything was where I'd left it, except for one thing. On the table near the mirror, someone had placed the navy blue book. It was open to a new page. In the same shaky hand, it read, "Lena listens, but she's not the only one." I didn't want to look at the mirror. Even covered, I could feel its presence like a breath on the back of my neck. It stood in the hallway outside the bedroom, tall and narrow, framed in black wood carved with delicate spirals. I didn't remember placing it there. I didn't remember owning it. Yet there it stood, as if it had always belonged to the house, or worse, as if I did. For a while I left it draped in the towel. I avoided the hallway entirely, taking the long route through the kitchen and back rooms. but the longer I ignored it, the more the rest of the house dimmed. The lights flickered more often. The sounds behind the walls grew sharper, more agitated. And each time I passed the hallway, I swore I heard breathing that didn't match mine. Slow, shallow, and coming from behind the glass. One morning, after another restless night of distant footsteps and whispered humming, I peeled the towel away. The mirror's surface was dusty, but clear. My reflection stared back, pale and tired, just as I expected. But something in the background caught my eye. A shape, low to the floor, behind me. I turned quickly. Nothing there. I looked back, at the mirror. The shape had moved, closer now. Still low, still shapeless, but undeniably present. I placed the towel back, but the shape lingered in my mind like a shadow behind my thoughts. I flipped through the navy blue book again. The latest page had changed. The ink had bled slightly, as if rained on. New words appeared beneath the last entry. Some reflections aren't echoes, some are doors. I touched the letters and felt a subtle warmth, as though the page had just been written, or was still being written. That evening, I sat across from the mirror with a candle lit between us. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I only watched. At first, the reflection matched me perfectly. Every blink, every breath. But as the candle burned lower, the timing shifted. I inhaled, and the reflection exhaled. I tilted my head, and it hesitated, just enough to make my skin crawl. Then it smiled. I didn't. I jerked back, knocking over the candle. The flame sputtered out, leaving only my rapid breathing and the whisper of wind outside. The hallway fell into shadow. I covered the mirror again with trembling hands and fled to the living room, where the lights felt safer, even if they flickered. But long after I left, I could still feel it watching. Not the reflection, the space inside the glass. It had shown me something, or maybe warned me. I dreamed of the mirror that night, not as an object, but as a hallway itself. Long, endless, lined with rooms filled with breathing walls. At the far end, a girl waited. Small, still, wrapped in a pink dress. Her mouth didn't move, but I heard her voice in my head. "Don't follow it," she said. "It looks like you, but it doesn't know your name." I woke in a sweat, the sound of rain beating hard against the roof. The house groaned like it was listening. In the morning, I found the mirror uncovered. I was sure I had wrapped it tightly, tucked the towel into the frame. But now it hung loosely over the side, as if someone or something had pulled it aside to see better. I didn't look into it. I simply folded the towel and set it on the ground, daring it to fall again. In the navy blue book, a new line had appeared. "She sees you now." Later that day, the humming returned. Not from the walls, from the mirror. Faint, but rhythmic. I placed my hand near the glass and felt warmth, pulsing slightly, as if it had a heartbeat. I whispered Lena and waited. The humming stopped. Then the reflection flickered. For a second, the glass didn't show me. It showed the hallway empty. Then it showed a figure walking away down that endless corridor, fading into shadow. Stepped back, shaken, unsure if what I'd seen was memory, echo, or warning. But that night, as the rain returned, I sat in bed, and felt a strange calm settle over me. The mirror was covered. The walls were quiet. But just before I fell asleep, I heard a voice outside my bedroom door. It wasn't mine. It wasn't Lena's. It simply said, soft and slow. She opened it. The next morning, the hallway was colder than the rest of the house. Not just cool from weather, but empty, drained, like something had passed through and taken the warmth with it. The towel lay crumpled on the floor, and the mirror gleamed, clean and polished, though I hadn't touched it. When I looked into it, the reflection was normal, at first. But behind me, the hallway extended further than it should. I turned quickly. Reality remained the same. Only the mirror had stretched. I moved the mirror into the storage room and leaned it face down, against the wall. I didn't cover it this time. I wanted to see if it would move again on its own. I placed a salt line at the base of the door. A ritual I barely remembered learning, maybe from my grandmother, maybe from a book. I wasn't sure anymore. But it made me feel like I had done something. The house stayed still the rest of the day, almost grateful. That night, I walked the halls and found something I hadn't noticed before. Scratches on the wood near the baseboards. Thin, short, clustered in groups of 5. Like small hands had been pressing there, testing. I followed the marks around corners, past the stairs, and finally back to the place where the mirror had stood. There, on the wall, was a faint circle, drawn in soot or ash. Inside it, a spiral. Not the first I'd seen, but this one looked fresher. I touched it, and a tremor passed through my fingertips, like the wall recognized me. I stepped back, heart pounding, and felt something shift in the floorboards beneath me. A subtle lift. A breath. I whispered, "What do you want from me?" and waited. No sound. But the navy blue book sat open on the desk. A new line had appeared. "You let her look too long." I didn't know if it meant Lena or the thing wearing my face. I only knew something had crossed through. Not escaped. Not yet. But it had seen the world on this side, and liked it. That night, the rain came hard again, and just before midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not slow like before. Not curious. These were fast. Urgent. And they stopped just outside my door. I didn't move. I sat on the bed, every muscle tight, listening to the creak of the old wood under invisible feet. The footsteps stopped just beyond the threshold. I waited for a knock, for a whisper, anything. But the silence was worse. It stretched long, pulsing with a presence I could feel in my teeth. Then the handle turned, slowly, smoothly, but the door didn't open. The turning stopped. Whatever was there was testing boundaries. I whispered, "Lena?" And the house answered, with stillness. Then came the sound I feared most. Not the voice, not the hum, but the soft drag of fingernails against wood. From behind the mirror room, not scratching, drawing, rewriting the shape of the house from the inside out. I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders and waited until morning, too afraid to sleep, too afraid to look. When the sun finally broke, through the clouds, I opened the door. The hallway was empty, no footprints, no signs of passage. But on the wall opposite my door, a new word had been drawn in charcoal. Just one. Soon. I wiped it away with a shaking hand, but it left a faint mark beneath the paint, like a scar the wall chose to keep. Downstairs, the navy blue book sat closed. A small black feather had been tucked between its pages, and beside it, on the windowsill, rested the key I'd left in the cemetery. I hadn't brought it back. I hadn't touched it. But it was here, warm to the touch, damp, as if pulled from soil. The spiral was etched faintly into its base, as if the house was done asking. Now it was claiming. That evening, just before the rain returned, I passed the hallway mirror, still in storage, still leaning face down. And yet, as I crossed the room, I saw movement in the polished floor, a flicker of something walking behind me. I stopped, looked over my shoulder. Nothing. But I didn't need to see it to understand. The reflection didn't need glass anymore. It had learned to walk without it. The storm came fast that night, wind whipping against the windows with a kind of rhythm, almost musical. I sat by the fire with the navy blue book in my lap, the key turning slowly in my hand. I knew where it fit. I had known for days, maybe longer. There was a hatch in the hallway floor, hidden beneath a woven rug. I'd stepped over it so many times it had become invisible. But the house had been patient, and now it was done waiting. I pulled the rug aside and stared at the seams of the hatch. The wood was old, dry, warped slightly at the corners. In its center was a small keyhole, shaped perfectly for the one I held. I hesitated, long enough to wonder if opening it would be permission, invitation, or surrender. Then I knelt and turned the key. It clicked once, deep and final. The wood shifted under my hand like a breath held too long. When I pulled it open, the smell that rose was sharp. Earth, metal, and something faintly sweet, like wilted flowers. A wooden ladder led down, into darkness. I lowered a flashlight first, then myself, descending slowly, each step creaking like it remembered someone else's weight. The air grew colder as I went, and the sound of the storm above dimmed to a distant whisper. Down there, the house was still. The crawlspace was tighter than I expected. Not quite a basement, not just a void. The walls were unfinished, earth pressed into jagged stone, and narrow boards framed paths like skeletal ribs. My light passed over objects I didn't understand. Bundles of cloth, broken toys, an old doll with one glass eye missing. These things hadn't been stored. They'd been placed, arranged, as if someone had lived here, or waited here. I moved carefully, my breath fogging in the cold. At the far end, the flashlight caught something etched into the wall, another spiral. This one larger, carved deep into the stone. Beneath it was a name, Lena, carved not once, but many times, overlapping, scratched again and again until it nearly disappeared into itself. I reached out to touch it, and the flashlight flickered. Just once. But when the light steadied, the air had changed. I wasn't alone anymore. I turned slowly, flashlight held tight in my hand, its beam shaking with every breath. The air was heavier now, still, but filled with something unspoken. I scanned the space behind me. Nothing moved. But the shadows felt wrong. They weren't just cast. They clung. I took a step back toward the ladder. but something on the ground caught my eye. A box, half buried in dirt and dust, with a rusted hinge and a torn ribbon wrapped around it. I knelt to open it. Inside were letters, brittle and yellowed, each folded neatly and tied with string. The handwriting was delicate and small. I picked one up and unfolded it carefully. It was addressed to Lena. The ink had faded, but the words held shape. I hear you at night. I know you're still there. I tried to find you. I tried to help. The letter ended without a name, just the drawing of a spiral in the bottom corner. Read another, and another, each one pleading, apologizing, promising. They weren't from the same person. Some were clearly written by children, others by adults. Some were frantic, others calm. All addressed to the same name, all written as if Lena were alive, as if she were trapped, as if she were listening. I set the letters down, heart pounding. The Crawlspace wasn't just a hiding place. It was a memorial, or maybe a message board. Then came the whisper. Close. So close it felt like breath on my neck. She's not alone. I spun around, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. Again, no one there. But something had changed. The spiral on the wall was glowing faintly now, as if the stone had remembered the hands that carved it. The letters in the box rustled slightly, though there was no wind. And above me, I heard the soft thud of footsteps inside the house. I hurried back to the ladder and climbed quickly, flashlight swinging wildly as I ascended. As I reached the top and pulled the hatch shut behind me, the air upstairs felt warmer, safer. But as I caught my breath in the hallway, something slid across the floor in the crawl space below. A dragging sound. Slow. Purposeful. And it wasn't following me. It was circling beneath the walls. I sat at the edge of the hatch for a long time. The key still clutched in my hand, heart racing. I kept expecting another knock, another whisper, another sign that the thing down there had followed me up. But it didn't. It stayed below, pacing, watching, waiting. I looked over at the navy blue book, still resting on the desk. A new line had appeared, written without ink. It remembers the shape of your breath. That night, I dreamt of the crawl space. Not the one I had entered, but a deeper one, beneath even that. Narrower, winding like a maze. And in it, the walls pulsed like skin. I walked barefoot, holding a candle that dripped salt instead of wax. All around me were whispers. Not words, but fragments of names. Lena's, mine, others I didn't know. I reached the center of the spiral in the dream and saw myself waiting there, eyes closed. When I opened mine, I screamed myself awake. Rain lashed the windows. The house groaned. I got up and checked every room. The mirror was still covered. The bookshelf still sealed. But as I passed the hatch, I noticed something new. Small, muddy footprints leading away from it. They were child-sized, bare. And they stopped just short of the hallway wall, where the wallpaper had begun to peel in a perfect spiral. I didn't touch it. I just stared, too afraid to blink. I walked backward to the bedroom and closed the door, locking it for the first time since I'd arrived. I sat in the corner with the navy blue book in my lap, whispering Lena's name under my breath like a charm, a tether, a reminder. The house didn't respond. The walls were silent, but the air inside the room felt pressed inward, like something was leaning against every surface at once, hugging the house from the inside. Then I heard it. Not from below, from the mirror. Even covered, the sound came through, light tapping, like fingernails on glass. Then a single word, spoken in my voice, but strained. Let me. I backed away slowly, blanket around my shoulders, heart hammering, in my chest. Whatever was beneath the house wasn't just trying to reach me anymore. It was trying to wear me. By morning, the tapping had stopped. The towel remained over the mirror, but I no longer trusted that to mean anything. I opened the bedroom door slowly, half expecting to find footprints leading back in. But there were none. Only the faint scent of damp earth and something older, like candle wax left too long in a drawer. I checked the hallway. The hatch was shut, but a thin line of dirt circled it now, like something had pressed upward from inside. I didn't open it again. Instead, I returned to the living room, hoping for light, for normalcy. The radio was on, even though I hadn't touched it. No music, no voice, just static and the occasional crackle, like someone dragging fabric across a microphone. I turned the dial slowly. One station came through just for a second. A child's voice sang a lullaby I didn't know but somehow remembered. Then static returned. I followed the sound to the mirror room. The air was colder there, thick with silence. The mirror leaned slightly now, like it had been moved, just enough to show a sliver of its face. I covered it again and spoke aloud. You can't have me. The navy blue book lay closed on the floor. When I picked it up, a page fell out. A photograph, blurry. A little girl in a hallway, half turned toward the camera. The edges burned slightly. On the back, in small, precise handwriting, she knew too much. That night, the rain returned harder than ever. The house shuddered with wind, its wooden bones creaking like tired breath. I lit every candle I had and placed them. In a circle around the living room, salt poured between the flames. I sat in the center, book in lap, mirror behind the sealed door. For hours, nothing happened. Then, just as I began to drift to sleep, the walls exhaled. Every candle flickered inward. A shadow passed just outside the ring of light. Small, barefoot, watching. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I simply sat there, listening as the whisper came from the crawlspace again. Not a threat. Not even a request. Just a promise. You won't leave. You're part of the house now. The wind screamed through the eaves like it was trying to speak a language I'd almost forgotten. Rain slammed against the windows in relentless sheets, and somewhere deep inside the walls, something shifted with rhythm, like a heartbeat. I sat on the floor of the living room, the navy blue book open beside me, candles flickering wildly despite the sealed windows. Each flame leaned toward the center of the circle, as if pulled by breath. I closed my eyes and tried to focus. My thoughts weren't my own anymore. They came in waves, overlapping, whispering things I didn't understand in voices that sounded like mine. But younger, softer, sadder. Some whispered names I'd never spoken. Others repeated the same word over and over. Listen. It was no longer just the house speaking. The storm had become a mouth, and I was inside of it. Suddenly, every candle extinguished at once. No wind, no breath, just darkness, pure and sudden. My heart raced. I held my breath, waiting for the sound. It came slowly from within the walls, a dragging noise like fingers over stone. Then a voice, clear, female, childlike. It whispered, "Let me in." Not angry, not desperate, just certain. A statement. A truth that had already happened. I stood up too quickly, nearly tripping over the salt line. I grabbed the flashlight and turned it on, but the beam was weak, drained, like everything else in the house. The navy blue book now lay open to a new page. I hadn't turned it. The writing was jagged this time, almost scratched into the paper. She's at the door. A single knock echoed through the house. Slow. Hollow. It didn't come from the front entrance. It came from the mirror room. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. Then silence. Then a sound like breath against glass. And then finally, my voice calling from behind the door. "Let me in." I didn't move. My hand hovered above the doorknob, heart thudding like a second storm inside my chest. The voice had been perfect. My cadence, my breath, my doubt. But the space behind the door felt wrong. Too quiet. Too cold. I whispered, "Who are you?" And the voice answered without pause, still using my tongue, "I'm what you left behind." The air turned thick, almost wet, like I was breathing through the walls themselves. I backed away, slowly, careful not to disturb the salt line. I didn't dare turn my back to the door. The handle twitched once, twice, then stopped. No force, no demand, just a reminder that it could. I retreated into the living room, relit one of the candles, and watched the wax melt into the spiral I'd carved into the wood days ago without realizing it. The pattern now pulsed faintly, like it had a heart of its own. The book remained open. A new line appeared as the flame grew. "You're not the first to hear her." I stared at the words, wondering how many had lived in this house before me. How many had listened too closely, remembered too much. Let the reflection speak for them. I whispered Lena's name, not to summon her, but to steady myself. A response came, not from the walls this time, but from the ceiling. Light footsteps. Bare. Pacing. Turning. Then stopping directly above me. I didn't look up. I couldn't. I simply whispered, "Please don't forget me," to the space between heartbeats. For a moment, everything stilled. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath. Then came a knock, not on the mirror, not on the door, from inside the wall behind the fireplace. And this time, the voice didn't speak in mine. It spoke in Lena's. She said only 2 words. "He's coming." The knock echoed in the stone behind the fireplace, low and deliberate. I crawled closer, pressing my ear to the cold surface. For a moment, there was nothing, just the slow tick of the clock above the mantel. Then came breathing. Not shallow like Lena's. This was deeper, rougher, like something that had forgotten how lungs worked but kept trying anyway. My breath caught in my throat. Lena's warning wasn't about herself. It was about whatever shared the walls with her. I reached for the poker near the hearth, hand shaking. I didn't know what I planned to do with it. Fight off a shadow? Tear open the stone? But having it made me feel less invisible. I knocked once against the bricks. The breathing stopped. Then something touched the inside of the wall. Not a knock, not a voice. Just a long, slow scrape of something blunt dragging from left to right. Like it was drawing a line, or a doorway. The book flipped a page on its own. A new phrase appeared, etched in deep black ink. She held him in silence. Now silence is hungry. I didn't understand it fully, but the weight of the words landed, in my gut, like a stone. Whatever Lena had done, whoever she had hidden, it was unraveling. The mirror wasn't the origin, it was the gateway. And the reflection, mine or otherwise, wasn't the only thing trying to get through. I heard movement upstairs. Not pacing now. Running. Something small darting from room to room. A door slammed. Then another. Then the unmistakable sound of something crawling, quick and desperate, across the ceiling beams. Dust fell from the corners of the living room, and I backed into the hallway, gripping the poker tight. I didn't want to look up. I knew better. But my eyes moved on their own. There, above me, in the shadows of the rafters, two eyes reflected the candlelight. Too wide, too still, watching. And then slowly a second pair opened beside them, lower, heavier. No face, no breath, just presence. The silence in the room became deafening, and I realized the house wasn't just haunted, it was inhabited, and the things inside it were learning to look back. I backed into the kitchen, never taking my eyes off the ceiling. The air pulsed with a pressure I couldn't place, thick, humming, alive. The eyes didn't blink. They didn't follow. They simply remained, fixed to the rafters like they'd been painted there long ago and were only now waking up. The silence roared inside my ears until I screamed, just to make noise. But even that didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. This moment I screamed, something moved in the walls, fast and hard, like a body slamming from one end of the house to the other. Cabinet doors burst open. A glass fell and shattered. Behind the fridge, I heard a low moan. Not human, not animal. A sound pulled from a place with no language. I fell to the floor, covering my ears, and whispered over and over, "Lena, I hear you. I hear you." And then, just as suddenly, everything stopped. The house exhaled, not gently, violently. Every candle in the living room blew out at once, and the windows rattled in their frames. From deep in the crawlspace, I heard her voice again, clearer now, more urgent. "Don't let him in." And this time, I believed her. Lena wasn't the one trying to cross over. She was the lock. And I had been picking at it for days. I rushed to the bookshelf and tore it open. The panel groaned, revealing the narrow hollow behind. I reached in blindly, hand searching through dust and darkness. Something brushed my fingers, soft and cold. I pulled it out. A photograph, old, warped. It showed a man with no eyes and a child with no mouth. In the background, the spiral. On the back of the photo, written in what looked like dried blood, she sealed him in with her name. I didn't sleep that night. I sat against the wall, holding the photo and the book, listening for her. The storm raged outside, but the house remained still. Lena wasn't gone. She was holding something back. Something worse than the voice, worse than the reflection. Something that remembered the taste of names, and it was hungry. The next morning, I walked through a house I no longer recognized. The furniture was the same, the floors unchanged, the cracks still creeping along the corners of the ceiling. But something was missing. Names, labels, meaning. The books on the shelves had no titles. The photographs on the walls were faded to shadows. Even the letters on my coffee mug had dissolved, as if language itself was slipping from the house one syllable at a time. I reached for the navy blue book, needing its weight in my hands, needing something familiar. But when I opened it, the pages were blank. Not empty. Blank. Like they'd been scrubbed. The texture of ink was still there, faint indentations where words had once lived. I flipped to the center, where my name had been written. The page was torn out. In its place was a smudge, reddish-brown, and a single spiral drawn with a fingertip. Panic fluttered in my chest. I opened the drawers. Nothing labeled. The envelopes in the desk were sealed but bore no names. Even my ID card, left on the kitchen counter, now held only a photo and a smear where my name should be. I said it out loud, just to feel it on my tongue. My name is... But the sound caught. I couldn't finish it. I couldn't remember how it ended. It was slipping. I was slipping. I stumbled into the hallway, breathing hard, gripping the wall like it could anchor me to memory. The mirror leaned there, uncovered now, though I hadn't removed the towel. My reflection stared back with wide, pleading eyes, and it mouthed something I couldn't hear. I watched my own face try to speak, lips forming shapes I couldn't. Red. I pressed my palm to the glass, and for the first time, the reflection didn't follow. It stayed still, mouth moving, whispering a name I no longer knew. Behind me, something moved in the crawlspace. Not a knock, not a whisper, a pulse. The house was alive in a way it hadn't been before, no longer waiting, no longer hiding. I looked into the mirror again, and this time, my reflection smiled. Not cruelly, not kindly, just knowingly. And then it turned and walked away, vanishing into a hallway that didn't exist behind me. I ran to the bookshelf, searching for anything that could ground me. A note, a letter, a word with weight. But the books were hollow now, empty jackets with blank insides, their spines unreadable. I tore through drawers, opened closets, checked under rugs, inside vases, behind paintings. Nothing bore a name. Not mine, not Lena's, not even the street I lived on. It was as if the house had devoured every trace of identity, every anchor to meaning. I picked up the photograph from the night before, the one with the eyeless man and the mute child. Even it had changed. The figures were blurred now, smeared, like paint left in the rain. The spiral in the background remained sharp, etched deeper than before. Beneath it, a new line had appeared. To forget is to open. My hands trembled as I turned the photo over. The writing on the back was gone. In its place was a fingerprint. Mine. I whispered Lena's name, again and again, like a chant. A mantra. But each time I said it, it sounded less certain. Was that really her name? Had it ever been? Or had the house given it to me? Given her to me? My thoughts scattered like leaves in wind. I clutched the navy blue book, now light as if hollowed out. I tried to write my name inside it, but the pen wouldn't work. The page swallowed the ink. I ran to the mirror, desperate, wild-eyed. My reflection was still gone, replaced by a girl standing in the hallway behind the glass. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. Her lips moved. "I remember you." Then behind her, a tall shape emerged, featureless, heavy, breathing in a way that pulled the edges of the world inward. It leaned close, and the girl flinched. The reflection blurred as if the glass itself recoiled. The air around me thickened. My legs buckled. I sank to the floor and clutched my head, trying to recite names. Any names. My childhood friends. My parents. Places I had been. But they slipped away like dreams at dawn. I could feel the spiral turning inside my skull, unwinding everything I'd built to define myself. And through it all, the only thing that remained clear was her voice, soft and small, whispering from behind the mirror. "Don't forget me, and I'll remember you." I crawled to the corner of the room where I'd hidden the letters, the ones addressed to Lena. My hands shook as I unfolded the first, afraid of what I'd find. The paper felt thinner than before, brittle like ash, but the words were still there. Dim, barely legible but present. "I hear you. I love you. I remember." 3 phrases. 3 threads in a world unraveling. I read them out loud until the words carved themselves into my tongue. Each letter held its own resistance. Even as the ink faded, the emotion clung to the page like a scent. I read them one by one, voice cracking, tears sliding down my face without sound. The house grew quieter with every name I spoke. Not safer, just stiller. Like it was listening, like it wasn't sure what to do with someone who dared to say what it had tried to erase. Then I found the letter with no writing at all, just the spiral, drawn slowly and with care, in what looked like charcoal. As I held it up to the light, words began to rise, faint and trembling like steam. "She was never meant to be forgotten, and neither were you." The ink bled into my fingers, and I suddenly remembered my mother's voice, my childhood bedroom, a lullaby I hadn't thought of in years. I said my name out loud, and this time it stayed. The mirror cracked, a hairline fracture, right across its center. My reflection flickered back into place. Hollow-eyed, yes, but mine. I stared into it, holding onto myself with both hands. Behind the glass, Lena stood straighter now. Her mouth no longer moved. She was watching, waiting. And behind her, the tall shape had stepped back, not gone, but hesitant. My act of remembrance had pushed it away. The navy blue book trembled in my lap. When I opened it again, a new page had formed, blank at first, then slowly filling with handwriting I recognized as my own. It said, "I am still here." And below it, a second line in smaller script. "So am I." I traced both sentences with my fingertips, and for the first time in days, the silence around me didn't feel like erasure. It felt like space, waiting to be filled with memory. I lit a candle and sat before the mirror, not to watch, but to speak. I told Lena everything I could remember. My name, my past, my fears. I recited the names from the letters again and again, giving each one breath, shape, and weight. I felt the room respond, not in movement or sound, but in stillness. A soft expansion, like lungs exhaling for the first time in years. The air grew warmer, less heavy, less hollow. The spiral on the wall beside the fireplace had begun to fade, as if the act of naming pulled it back into the stone. I walked to it and placed my palm on the surface. It no longer pulsed, no longer burned, just cool earth and forgotten paint. The reflection in the mirror behind me stood beside Lena now. A third shape, smaller than the tall figure, taller than her, watching, holding her hand. I didn't need to ask who it was. I knew. The house groaned, not in pain, but in release. A long, low sound like tired wood loosening after too many years wound tight. The letters on my ID returned faintly, blurred but visible. The books regained their titles, their meaning. Even the navy blue cover bore a name now. Echoes We Kept. I opened it and saw every page rewritten, not just by me, but by others. Lines of memory woven like thread, messy but intact. It was a record, a defense. I didn't sleep that night, but I wasn't afraid. The house was quiet, not because it had silenced me, but because it was listening. Lena appeared in the mirror, only once more. She placed her hand on the glass, smiled softly, and mouthed something I couldn't hear. But I understood. I whispered, "I won't forget you." And in the silence that followed, I felt something deeper than relief. I felt return. When morning came, the storm had passed. The light through the windows was clean, pure. I opened every curtain, every window. I let the air in. I placed the book by the fireplace and left the mirror uncovered. I didn't need protection anymore. Not from Lena, not from memory. What comes next, I thought, will try again. It always does. But now I have names, and as long as I remember them, I'll never be alone. It began with a breath, slow, deliberate, and not mine. I was standing in the hallway outside the bedroom when the wall exhaled, not through a crack or vent, but through the wallpaper itself. The surface rippled softly, like a veil stirred by wind. I placed my hand against it and felt warmth, not heat, not cold, something in between, like skin. Then a sound, a soft knock from within, 3 times. No voice, no warning, just a rhythm I now understood as invitation. The spiral reappeared, near the baseboard, drawn not in soot or blood this time, but in light. Faint, gold and pulsing like a heartbeat. I followed it with my eyes until it met a seam I hadn't seen before. The wall, once solid, now felt like paper stretched over breath. I pressed gently, and the surface gave way beneath my fingertips, curling inward with ease. There was no resistance. The house had stopped holding secrets. It wanted to be seen. Behind, the wall was a narrow opening, tall enough to crawl through, lined with wood aged to black. I didn't hesitate. I lit a lantern and stepped inside, the sound of my own heartbeat loud in the silence. The tunnel bent slightly, and as I moved deeper, I felt the temperature drop. Not from cold, but memory. The kind that settles in places, untouched by light. My breath fogged, but the lantern remained steady. The house wanted me here. The walls around me were covered in handprints, tiny, smeared, layered over one another like waves. Some were open, some clenched, some traced spirals. I ran my fingers over them and felt impressions, like soft clay, long dried. As I reached the end of the passage, I found a wooden door with no knob, no lock, just a hole where something once sealed it. I pressed my palm to it, and it opened with a sigh. Inside was a small room. A child's room. Dust hung in the air like breath not yet exhaled. There was a bed made of rough wood, a blanket folded neatly at the foot. On the floor were scattered toys, handmade, carved with initials I couldn't read. In the far corner, a dress lay folded beside a cracked music box. I stepped forward and wound it slowly. It played the same lullaby I'd heard through the radio, soft, fractured, and familiar. I sat beside the bed, letting the song wind down to silence. The room didn't feel haunted. It felt paused, like a breath held between sentences. I touched the fabric of the blanket. It was soft, clean, recent. Someone had cared for this space long after it had been hidden. Above the bed, a name was carved into the wall. Lena. Not scratched, not angry. Carefully etched, as if someone had whispered each letter as they pressed the blade into wood. I turned toward the corner where the dress lay folded. As I reached out, a small gust of air brushed my wrist. I paused. The air didn't come from the door. It came from beneath the floor. A board creaked softly, shifting, under invisible weight. I knelt and pressed my ear to the ground. From below I heard breathing, slow, deep, and rhythmic. Not Lena. Something older. Something waiting. The crawl space extended farther than I thought. A faint light flickered under the bed. I bent down and saw a candle, lit, flickering gently. No matches. No signs of flame. Just fire, burning patiently in the dark. Beside it sat a doll. I recognized it instantly. The same one I'd seen near the crawl space in the early days. Its eyes were closed now, sewn shut with black thread. A spiral had been carved into its chest. I didn't touch it. I only whispered, "I see you." And the flame trembled in response. I stood slowly, and that's when I noticed the writing on the far wall. It hadn't been there a moment ago. Words etched in deep, uneven lines. She stayed, so he couldn't leave. My breath caught. The truth settled like dust in my lungs. Lena hadn't been trapped. She had remained. She had become part of the walls to keep something else in. She wasn't asking for rescue. She was holding the door shut from the inside. Then I heard her voice, not from the mirror, not from behind me, inside me. "Don't open it." Her words echoed in my bones, in the air, in the trembling wood beneath my feet. The walls around, the room began to hum, low and slow, vibrating like a warning. But I already knew. The house wasn't finished. There was still one place I hadn't gone, and it was calling. I found the second hatch beneath the rug in Lena's room, smaller than the first, older, its wood blackened with time and something deeper. The spiral was burned into its center, surrounded by faint letters, now unreadable. I hesitated only once before opening it. The hinges groaned like an old throat clearing itself before speaking. The air that rose from below wasn't cold. It was empty. Like sound couldn't survive down there. I descended the ladder slowly, each step groaning beneath my weight. The walls were earth again, but smoother now, like they'd been shaped by hands. Hands that never intended to leave. My flashlight flickered once, then held. The passage opened into a low, wide chamber. It smelled of damp wood, wax, and memory. In the center, Someone had carved a spiral into the floor, not with a tool, with fingernails. Around the spiral were dozens of objects, personal things, a photograph torn in half, a child's shoe, a page from a diary written in looping cursive, all of them arranged in a ring. I stepped carefully among them, afraid to disturb whatever pattern held them in place. As I neared the center, I saw it. A mirror, cracked, buried halfway into the ground. Its surface faced up toward the ceiling, and in it, I saw not my reflection, but Lena's. She looked older now, tired. Her eyes met mine, and she mouthed something I couldn't hear. I knelt beside the mirror and leaned closer. That's when I saw what she was trying to show me. Behind her stood the shape, the one from the rafters, the one behind the mirror. It no longer watched. It moved, slowly, toward her, toward me. Its hands brushed the edge of her shoulder and she flinched, but she didn't look away. Neither did I. I whispered, "What do I do?" And this time, she answered aloud. Her voice didn't echo. It folded into the room like cloth. "Remember us." And with that, the spiral beneath me glowed faintly. Once, then again, matching the rhythm of my breath. I understood then. The spiral wasn't a prison. It was a memory, a map. And if I followed it carefully, I might find the thread that held everything together before it snapped. I stayed on the floor for a long time, knees aching, fingers cramping around the mirror shard now dark and lifeless. The spiral was gone. Not faded, gone, as if it had never been carved into the floor. I checked the mirror on the wall. Cracked. Blank. No reflection. Not mine. Not hers. The house was still, and for the first time, I could hear the small sounds again. My own breathing, the creak of settling wood, the soft rustle of curtains moving with real wind. I walked through the rooms one by one. The photographs had returned to their frames. The books were back on. The shelves, though some had titles I didn't recognize. In the kitchen, the kettle whistled faintly, though I hadn't turned on the stove. Time, it seemed, had unraveled and rewound, but not perfectly. There were gaps, moments of déjà vu, in the placement of objects, names missing from the covers of letters, as if the house remembered most of what it was, but not all. Outside, the sky was gray but calm. The house stood motionless, windows closed, its breath steady again. I approached the mirror room once more. The towel still lay folded on the floor. The mirror stood where I'd left it, unbroken now, but the reflection was empty. No hallway behind me, no shadows at the edge. Just me. And even that looked unfamiliar. Like the house had returned what it thought I looked like, not what I truly was. I returned to the hidden room and placed the music box on the bed, rewinding it one final time. It played the same off-tune lullaby, but softer now, like a whisper, from behind the door. I placed the navy blue book beside it. It closed by itself, gently. I didn't try to write again. Some stories aren't meant to be finished. They're meant to be remembered, just enough to keep the dark from waking hungry. That night, I dreamed of the house. Not as it was, but as it had been. Whole. Bright. With laughter in the walls and names carved into every beam. I saw Lena playing, near the edge of a mirror that never cracked. I saw myself watching, not afraid, not lost, just aware. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the name had not been destroyed, only fed. And one day, when silence grows long again, and memory grows thin, it will begin to whisper once more. The days that followed passed quietly. No footsteps in the ceiling, no whispers from the crawlspace. Just wind, just light, just breath. I found myself walking from room to room like someone visiting a place they used to live. Familiar, but distant, as if the walls remembered me more clearly than I remembered them. I ran my hand along the banister and whispered Lena's name. Not as a question, not as a plea, just to keep it alive. The mirror stayed uncovered. It no longer called to me, no longer watched. My reflection was my own again, tired, changed, but whole. I stood before it each morning and said my name aloud, just to be sure. It never vanished. It never hesitated. But some days, when the light hit the glass just right, I thought I saw another hallway waiting behind me. Not threatening, just waiting. I returned to the hidden room once. Only once. The spiral was still gone. The music box untouched. The bed still made. But there was something different in the air. A warmth that hadn't been there before. Like the room had finally exhaled. On the wall above the bed, where Lena's name had been carved, a second word had appeared beneath it. Kept. Not carved. Grown. As though the wood itself had remembered. I started writing again. Not in the navy blue book, but in a journal of my own. Names, dates, places. Things I feared I'd forget if I let them float too far from the surface. Memory became ritual. I lit a candle each night, not for protection, but to mark the fact that I was still here, still holding on to what mattered. The house no longer whispered, but it listened. I could feel it in the quiet between sentences. Then, one night, just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard it. A soft sound, not from the mirror, not from the walls, from outside, beyond the window. Rain, gentle, steady, familiar. I rose and opened the curtain, half expecting to see a figure beneath the tree line watching, but there was only mist. And in that mist, the faintest sound, barely there. A voice, a child's, saying one word. Stay. The villagers began to change, slowly. They remembered things they hadn't before. Names of relatives long buried. Faces of those who had vanished in storms past. One woman placed flowers beside the collapsed stone well behind her cottage and said, "For my sister," though she swore she never had one. A boy brought me a drawing of the lighthouse, though his parents insisted he'd never seen it lit. Whatever had been unspoken was surfacing, like driftwood after a tide. The spiral never returned, not on the walls, not on the floor. But I dreamt of it often, drawn not in ink or blood, but in sound. A low hum beneath the waves. A rhythm that only made sense when you stopped listening and started remembering. I stopped fearing it. I began to respect it. There was power in forgetting, I realized, but far more in choosing what to remember, and when. I started writing again. Not the journal. That stayed sealed. But new pages. My pages. Stories of this place. Of the names I could still recall. Of the ones I feared were slipping. I didn't write for others. I wrote for the cracks. For the shadows that still lingered in the corners at night. For the mirror that sometimes trembled under the cloth. And sometimes I swear, when the rain begins to fall just right, I hear Lena's voice humming along the rooftop, keeping time with mine. I planted herbs in the window box where the salt used to collect. Lavender, rosemary, names with roots. One morning I found a spiral traced into the soil with a stone. Not deep, not threatening, just left. A mark. I left it alone. Let it fade naturally. These are not signs to erase, I've learned. They're invitations to remember and to choose how you live beside them. The sea doesn't stop rising, but we can build stories strong enough to float. At sunset, I walk the cliffs. The wind carries the scent of brine and something sweeter I can't name. The house stays quiet, but some nights I feel its gaze. Not harsh, not cold, just aware. And I nod to it, like to an old neighbor. Not quite a friend, but no longer a stranger. We've made a kind of peace, I think, or maybe just a promise. I won't forget it, and in return, it won't take what I'm not ready to give. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd said my name a third time. If I'd given in to the pull of the mirror, or followed the voice down the spiral to where memory goes to drown. But then I see the sunrise burn gold across the sea, and I remember that even curses can be undone. Not with fire or salt, but with remembrance. I'm not the keeper of the light, I'm the keeper of its story, and maybe that's more important. The villagers have stopped asking where I came from. They greet me with quiet nods and pass baskets of fruit or folded letters to leave on my doorstep. I open some. Others I bury beneath the roots of the oldest tree near the shore. Names I've found, like seeds, grow stronger when planted with care. Even if no one else remembers who they belong to, the earth does, the sea does, and sometimes I think the lighthouse does too. A girl came to my door last week. She couldn't have been older than 10. She asked if the house was haunted. I told her no. She asked if it had always been mine. I said, not always, but now it remembers me. She smiled and said she could hear the wind say her name sometimes. I didn't warn her. I only asked what she did when it spoke. She answered, I talk back. I smiled. That's good, I said. Just don't forget who you are when you do. That night, I stood outside with the locket in my hand and the wind at my back. I whispered her name again, Ellery, and felt the ground hum beneath me. A soft acknowledgement, not grief, not hunger, just presence. And I knew then, some disappearances aren't endings. They're exchanges. Pieces of ourselves we lend to, the world so it can hold them when we no longer can. Not loss, not erasure, a kind of transformation. The mirror still waits in the hall, covered, quiet. I don't fear it now. It's not a trap. It's a door. And doors, I've learned, don't just open one way. If one day I feel the light pass over me again, or the whisper call my name a third time, I'll be ready. Not with resistance, but with memory, with stories, with names. And maybe that's all the house ever wanted. Not to consume us, but to be remembered by us before the dark. I walk the cliffs most evenings now, when the sky begins to turn and the tide hums low like a lullaby. I speak to no one. but I speak. Names, mostly. Sometimes stories, sometimes only silence. I let the sea carry the sound as far as it's willing. I think that's how the house listens now. Not through mirrors or light, but through wind, through the breath between words, through the weight we give to remembering. The town still changes. New faces arrive, and sometimes old ones vanish. But the houses remain, the stones remain, and the sea remembers, even when we don't. I've learned not to fear the missing pieces. Some gaps are meant to stay open. They let the light in. They let the names echo a little longer before fading. And if you listen closely on the right kind of night, you'll hear them. Not as ghosts, but as gratitude. I don't know how long I'll stay here. Maybe forever. Maybe just until someone else finds their way to the door, mirror-covered, journal-bound, drawn by dreams they can't explain. When that happens, I'll leave the key beneath the stone, where I once found the map, and I'll write their name beside mine. Not to bind them, but to remember them, in case they forget themselves along the way. The mirror hasn't lit again since that night, but that's all right. Some lights are meant to rest. Others burn quietly, unseen, in the hearts of those who carry their stories forward, and I've made peace with being one of them. I've stopped trying to seal the door or silence the wind. I've learned to listen without fear, to speak without invitation, and to remember without needing to be remembered in return. When the fog returns and the cliffs vanish into mist, I don't close the curtains. I watch, and I wait. And sometimes, when the storm curls over the sea like a hand pulling the past into the present, I whisper into the dark, I remember you. And the dark in its endless hush whispers back, so do I. She stayed not for fear, but for names left unsaid, for echoes that wandered between walls and thread. A whisper, a knock, a breath held too long. The silence itself was part of the song. The spiral is gone, but the rhythm remains. In soil, in stone, in salt-slicked stains. The mirror reflects not shadow or flame, but those who dare to speak a name. No locks on the doors, no curse in the floor. Just memory pulsing from rafter to core. If ever you hear a voice through the rain, it's not to haunt, it's to know you again. So leave the light low, let the fog settle near. There's nothing to fear if you choose to hear. Not all ghosts linger to take or to stay. Some only return to light the way.